Shalom, shalom, Mishpachah. This is Jared Yao checking in. So for the last several nights, or the last few nights at least, we've done, we've asked the question, what is America? And we're going to continue with that concept right now. So we've discussed about America. What type of nation is it? It's called a democratic republic, but it's the first type of nation that it is, where there's no monarchy, there's no king, there's no royal bloodline or any of those different things. It's a brand new style of nation that is out west in America. And so, what type of nation is it? Where does it come from? Where do the ideas come from? What is its purpose? What is its goal spiritually? Where can we find America in prophecy, right? So, one concept that I really wanted to get out to you guys so that you can really know how we analyze or I say we, I say how we analyze, I said we again, how I analyze the, the facts surrounding the mystery, right? So the way that you do it is that each new piece of information that you gather that you can prove to be correct and not false has to be added in to your overall assessment of what's happening. Do you see what I mean? In order to make sense out of the whole story, you have to incorporate all the elements within the story in order for it to completely gel together. Do you see what I mean? You can't pretend that elections are not rigged when 20 years ago we saw an election get rigged. And if anybody was, you know, old enough to remember at that time from 2000 to 2001 with Al Gore and George Bush Jr., there was a huge discrepancy that took, 2-3 weeks to resolve, where Al Gore just resigned his position. And even though Al Gore got more raw votes than George Bush, they called it for George Bush, I believe the same night. And since it was called for George Bush, the onus was on Al Gore camp to prove that it wasn't George Bush's election. And the excuse was given that the more Al Gore hung on, the more the nation would be in turmoil because of the indecisive, or the fact that there was no decision made. So, the public was told that Al Gore decided to drop out of contention for the good of for the good of company or country, America. We talked about being a country yesterday, I believe it was. And so this supposedly happened. This is the turn of events that allowed George Bush to be in the president's seat. Well, we know that if the votes were that close, then it could have swung either way. We're just looking at it from a just standard non-conspiratorial type of way. We know that they could have picked which president they wanted. If they were that close, then they could have picked the one that they wanted to be there, right? So here we are 20 years in the future. What's stopping them from doing the same thing? I hate to get into right-wing talking points, but you do have digitized voting machines now. And so any digital environment can be manipulated. Doesn't matter if it's encrypted or encoded or, behind firewalls, it just doesn't matter. What software companies do is they create backdoors into their software, create, special keys to get you into inaccessible places by other members of the same software or the same programs. This is how you make, sabotage software. You create the software and then create the way to break the software. which is what they do, which is what they've done with these voting machines, so that they can all be manipulated. All voting machines, all digital voting machines can be manipulated. Do you understand what I mean? Unless you have literally a hand count vote, then you will have issues with any voting process. So, with this new information in mind, I say new, it's 20 years old now that they can manipulate the elections, right? But we'll call it new. With this new information in mind, you then apply that to what you see each year with the new election coming around, with Kamala Harris being um, chosen by the Democratic Party instead of voted in. Do you see what I mean? Because of the last minute theatrics with Joe Biden, him with quote unquote failing health, and all of the circus that you've seen for the last 4 years or 3.5 or however many it was, they have the option to do better. Do you see what I'm saying? Anytime you see rich people, wealthy people, well-to-do, high members of society doing things that seem to be obviously dumb or, you know, ill prepared or just plain stupid sometimes. Seeing people like Trump texting Kofifi. Do you guys remember that when Trump texted Kofifi? This is a code. They're using coded language to do specific things. They're not making these huge mistakes on a presidential level. Yeah, you can go inside. They're not making these huge mistakes on a presidential level, and they're getting out for the public to see it. Do you see what I mean? The people that are in these high positions are able to control the press that they put out. So that make sure you shut that door. So that means that anything that does get out is then um, something that they wanted to get out, something that they wanted to do, an event that they wanted to happen. So don't think anytime you see incompetence that it's actually incompetence. It's more likely part of the plan incorporated to make you think they're incompetent. Like the Secret Service failing to find a sniper who shoots and just barely misses the president when the event taken for what it is boosts and bolsters president's presidential feel. Do you see what I'm saying? The president, President Trump, or ex-President Trump, it bolsters his presidential image, being able to survive an assassination attempt where other presidents have not. The whole MAGA cult that has developed around President Trump likens him to JFK already. If you guys are familiar with the crazies in that camp, you'll recognize that they thought that JFK, you won't, I mean, if you are not familiar, then then it may make you, question what reality that we live in, because a lot of these things that these people believe in are just so ridiculous that it just defies all logic. There was an event a couple years ago in Dallas, Texas, that was to be for the MAGA crowd, some sort of resurrection event. If you guys go and look this up, there were people that gathered at a place, I believe it was Dealey Plaza even, where JFK was assassinated. There were people that gathered in Dealey Plaza waiting for JFK and JFK Jr. to be resurrected and crown Trump King of America. Do you guys understand that this is what people believed was going to happen? That people actually were there in Dealey Plaza waiting on JFK? I mean, does it make sense that people are believing these things in 2024? Does it make sense that people are equating a president to a messiah? It does not, unless you recognize that all of these things are designed psychological tools that are able to create in the minds of them that believe obedience, right? They're designed to create obedience. And they're literally doing that. That's the goal of faking an assassination. They want people to be more obedient. They want people to be obedient to the point of death. Shalom, shalom, mishpachah, whoever came in here. So where does that level of obedience come from in a country that doesn't have an Elohim at its center or a king at its center? Well, it comes from these political pundits that play that role, play that messianic role in the minds of the people that support them. If you guys remember when Barack Obama, and you guys have to recognize I voted for Barack Obama twice, right? He fooled me 2 times. And it wasn't necessarily him that fooled me. He just had to step to position. They had the propaganda already in place, right? All of the things that you needed as a black man in America to vote for this other black man in America were already set in stone and already available for you to access, right? In your walking, waking, everyday media life. Do you see what I'm saying? This is back in 2008 when he became President Obama. And so during that time, one of the one of my favorite comedians, maybe my favorite comedian of all time, um, Jamie Foxx, right? Jamie Foxx was one of the people that was introducing Obama for him to come out on stage and give this speech, right? To rile people up to go vote, right? And so when he was introducing Obama, he introduced him as your Lord and Savior, Barack Obama. Do you see what I'm saying? They've already got that propaganda in place that Obama is the Messiah. On Time Magazine, they had him depicted with the halo around his head, showing him in a meme that has been representative of quote unquote Christ for the past 500 years, right? They even had him with the multi arms, like the demon god. I forgot the name of that demon god from India with the multiple arms. They had him doing that on the cover of a Time magazine. Do you see what I'm saying? So the propaganda that is leading people to believe in their presidential candidates, the people that represent them in a party, the propaganda that leads them to believe that these are salvational figures exist already. And if you watch close enough, it's using the ancient understanding of resurrections, of messianic figures, of brightness shining from their face like an angel. Do you see what I'm saying? To connect to these modern manipulators. And this is not a new concept. This is what they used to start America way back when. Do you understand what I mean? They utilized the Christian themes in order to build a satanic society using Christian labor. Not just Christian labor, but also then Hebrew slave labor, because the Christian labor was the white population that was managing the Hebrew slave labor. Two aspects of slavery. Don't think that white people are out there not enslaved too. They're in a mental subjugation, not in the same deepness that we are, but in a similar fashion. Because they're out there not knowing that they're Gog and Magog, and thus doing what they believed to have been, quote unquote, the Lord's will, but but actually the will of Gog and Magog, right? To establish this Satanation. And so years and years ago, when and I guess we'll start right at Benjamin Franklin like we did yesterday, then move up to go on past that. But then move to go on past that because there was something that I failed to mention about Benjamin Franklin that's really important for you to understand his character, and then the character of the people that are around him, the type of company that he keeps. And the company that he keeps would be names that we all know, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, George Washington, all of the major figures in the signing of the Declaration of Independence and creating this new nation based on enlightenment and reason theories, right? In thought, supposedly, right? And so this guy, Benjamin Franklin, was a full-fledged, right on out, in your face Satanist. He was a member of the Hellfire Club in France, which was a satanic cult that performed their rituals under a cathedral in downtown Paris, I believe it was. And he was so anti-Christian that they would that they would perform black masses and mock Christian themes in this cathedral underground. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not only was Benjamin Franklin this, high Satanist, he was also a Freemason and was in several secret societies. So what does Satanism and Freemasonry have in common? Well, they're just different names to the same cult. If they're that closely linked, then they must have some really close commonalities. And not only close commonalities, but ones that you would not always see if you're not a member or a high up member of these particular groups. Do you see what I'm saying? And so what Benjamin Franklin was, and we talked about this the other day, was a triple agent that worked for England, that worked for France, and that worked for America, and was instrumental in organizing the war effort on all these fronts. So if he is able to bounce back and forth between these warring nations, there must mean that there's some sort of political intrigue that's going on that he's involved in, that he's allowed to get away with, because he wasn't persecuted or prosecuted in America as working with the enemy when he's in England in these satanic cults, or in Paris in these satanic cults. He's not, being investigated for treason like some of the other people who were willing and dealing in England and in America. He's on that level. Do you see what I'm saying? He's on a higher level to where that he's able to design these psychological games that they're playing now then. Do you see what I'm saying? The other thing that Benjamin Franklin was accused of at a later stage. So Benjamin Franklin had a house in England, and it just so happens that at this house, they excavated the property years later, hundreds of years later, recently. Do you see what I'm saying? Within the last 25 years or so, they excavated Benjamin Franklin's old house, right, and his yard, and they found skeletons in the backyard. Old skeletons that looked like they would have dated from the time of Benjamin Franklin. This is in his time in England. So at some point in time, because Benjamin Franklin was also, supposed to be some sort of doctor, supposedly some sort of medical doctor, an experimenter. Do you see what I'm saying? So what they said was that Benjamin Franklin was either a grave robber or a serial killer. Do you guys understand? This statesman, this politician, this famous worldwide figure, this philanthropist, do you see what I'm saying? This person who was supposed to be the pillar of the enlightened community is spending his, weekends and late nights in England and in Paris in satanic cults, either digging up graves, experiment on people's bodies, or killing them, or both. The evidence points to him being a serial killer. And it lines directly up because guess what? That's what Satanists do. That satanic cults, even today in America, are still actively killing people like serial killers. You guys don't recognize that Ted Bundy, what's the one that used to eat people? Jeffrey Dahmer, What's the one? All of these serial killers, all of them, the BTK killer, the Green River killer, the Son of Sam, every single famous serial killer in America is linked to a satanic cult. And those satanic cults are linked to the government in the same exact way as it was in 1776. Now, how can the same underground secret issue be a problem then and now? Why wasn't it found out, stomped out, and put to the side? Why? Because America itself is the satanic mechanism. Do you see what I'm saying? America itself is the satanic mechanism. If you find out, if you find out that Benjamin Franklin is a serial killer, how does that change your perception of history? How does the kite and the key in the storm, how does that story change for you? Finding this information out that Benjamin Franklin had literal skeletons in his closet. Literal skeletons in his closet, you guys. Now that you know that information about, you guys go look this up. And here's the other crazy part about it. I can't remember if it's Jack the Ripper or some other famous English serial killer figure from that same era that they accused Benjamin Franklin of being. But if I'm correct in my timing here, that famous serial killer from that era in England could have been Jack the Ripper, and Benjamin Franklin in the modern era with all of these skeletons, literal skeletons found in his backyard, was accused of possibly being Jack the Ripper. If it turns out that Benjamin Franklin is actually Jack the Ripper, how does American history change? Do you see what I'm saying? How do you use that information and implement it into what you know about society already? You know, you've got Benjamin Franklin taught in every school in America right now as a founding father, one of the figures of American history that we should be proud of, right? As an American, we should be proud of these, pillars of society that have worked hard to create this bastion of freedom that we so called have. Up, if that's not what we have, if we actually have a satanic governing system which manipulates its people in order to enslave the Hebrew population, then who does Benjamin Franklin become? Then are you surprised that since you understand today America is a satanic society, that 200 years ago, Benjamin Franklin was involved in these torturous and murderous satanic activities? No, you're not surprised because you've seen it happen already. Because you've accurately merged the information that you've been able to get from doing your research into what you know about society already. This is like this now, okay? This is why we have this in our society now, because it comes from way, way back in a time when people didn't even expect there to be such satanic activity going on. So, again, there are several aspects of this that people have to incorporate into their understanding of America in order for America to make sense, right? And so the next aspect that you must incorporate is that if America is a satanic society, and that satanic society is doing the will of the adversary, and the will of the adversary is to go against Elohim, people of course call him God, is to go against God, and then Elohim, God, has a chosen people in the world, a people that have been set aside for his will, who weren't doing that. What do you think the goal, the plan of a satanic society would be? Do you see what I'm saying? What then would the goal of a satanic society be if they were able to establish it in secret? Well, it would have to be the eradication, imprisonment of Elohim's representatives on earth. Do you understand what I mean? Elohim's representatives on earth are not Christian pastors because they weren't the ones being enslaved in 1776. Do you see what I'm saying? Elohim's representatives on earth are not this government, are not any people involved in the government. Because again, they're not the ones that were enslaved in 1776. They're the ones that propagated and um, um, I guess magnified the slavery. They're the ones that instigated the slavery, that perfected it. Do you see what I'm saying? So then that must be the goal of the society. If you understand America as being a satanic mechanism to keep Hebrews imprisoned, then you're not prized at Kamala Harris, right? No reparation, Kamala Harris, right? Won't even discuss giving black people anything specifically for themselves. And they have us repeating this mantra. Hey, why should she give us anything as a people or make any programs dedicated directly to us when we can do it for ourselves? And at the same time, Latino groups are getting programs directly for them. Asian American groups are getting programs directly for them. Indian American groups, programs directly for them. Do you see what I'm saying? Even the migrants that are here within the past 5 years, but within the past 5 months, because this is the issue that's going on right now with the migrant crisis. Within the last 5 months, do you see what I'm saying? People with more benefits and more access than the Americans, or quote unquote minority Americans. Do you see what I'm saying? Black minority Americans. You see what I mean? You have to you have to make the connection that a satanic society would kill its Hebrew people. A satanic society would be secretly against the people that are supposed to be representatives of Elohim, especially if they're vulnerable because they're not keeping the commandments, or they're vulnerable because they haven't believed in the Messiah. They're vulnerable. We're vulnerable when we break the commandments. Scripture says, if you keep the commandments, then I will make you the head and them the tail. That when you go into battle, you will go in one way and they will flee 7 ways. You will lend to them and they will not lend to you. If you don't keep the commandments, you will go in one way and flee out 7 ways. You will be the tail and not the head. You will borrow from them and they will lend to you. You will be made a slave and no man will redeem you. Is that the history that America has with its blacks? It's exactly that same history. And we can chronicle that history in eras of time. Boys, y'all better get tuned in there. We can chronicle that history through moments of time in recognizing the different Holocausts that that the people have gone through in America. Black folks have gone through in America since the close of slavery. Do you see what I'm saying? In 1865. We discussed this yesterday, I think it was. This is where we're going to catch back up and discuss all of the Holocaust that have been, hoisted upon the people, the Hebraic population of America. So we see in the 1800s, we talked about this yesterday, that in 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation is presented, and this frees the slaves of America, the Hebrew slaves in America, so that they can then be more members of society and not looked at as 3/5 of a man, chattel slaves, right? And so this is this comes to pass in 1865. Black Americans are considered free, and then they go out to do their own thing. So, what was anticipated, because the thing about it is, the only reason this comes about is because Abraham Lincoln is going to use the the driving force behind the southern states' economic prowess against them, right? He wants to keep the Union unified. And as as these plans and these control mechanisms began to fall apart, which slavery was beginning to fall apart, abolitionism was popular in America. And we talked about this too, because if you've already grown rich and fat from your slave labor, that means you now have time to think. Gaining money, you're spending 100 years, 3 generations gaining and saving. Once you get to that generation that doesn't have to work, that generation that doesn't have to work at all, that doesn't have to put these programs in place, looks up and says, hey, now that I'm rich and famous and fat, these programs my fathers and my grandfathers put in place are evil. You see what I'm saying? Like the hippie generation looking at Vietnam and saying, this is evil, right? It's the same thing for the abolitionist generation. It was the backlash against their fathers. This slave system is evil, and you guys are responsible, and we've been rich for 2 generations because of this, and now we're sick of it, right? How can we call ourselves the land of the free? How can we call ourselves Christians if we've got these? This is a lie. Our country is a lie. Do you see what I'm saying? This is what started to happen in the middle of the 1800s. The abolitionist movement was very strong. And Abraham Lincoln, being the clever politician that he was, saw a way to keep the nation unified by crippling the Southern economic prowess. And then also joining himself, at least in name, to a growing movement, not of equality, but of decency. Do you see what I'm saying? Not of equality, because Abraham Lincoln wasn't preaching equality. He wasn't talking equality. He was using this as a political ploy to keep the nation united, to continue to be in power, to continue to have one force instead of a divided force. Do you see what I mean? So when we look at what happens after slavery, because again, slavery was a means to an end. Once the slaves were sufficiently brainwashed and built the country, now you don't have to worry about them out there trying to keep the commandments and trying to become righteous, because they don't even have they don't even have the tools to find that in the text. Do you see what I'm saying? They've already been convinced by this time by re-education, because this is another part of it, the re-education system that they had to do to the Hebrew people. They've already been convinced that they're a whole other group of people. And now you don't have to fight them in that aspect. You don't have to fight them about their history. They'll they will settle themselves into the history that you've given, right? And then you won't have to worry about them. You can go ahead and free these slaves, even though there's, the political intrigue between the North and the South was, Abraham Lincoln making this play to keep the Union together. The plan was, we can free them if we need to. We've got everything we need out of them. Now they're so miseducated that they'll just assume the position that they left, assume the position that we have waiting for them. They'll just come right back. Have my house back? Can I have my field back so I can just start up on this new job, or on this new understanding, but with the old job, still a slave? Nope. That did not happen. People, what they did was they got up with the very little things that they had and moved. There was a massive 1,000,000-man migration that founded cities like Chicago, that founded cities like Detroit, that founded cities like LA and Seattle and Houston and Tulsa. All of this was 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 black entrepreneurship becoming in the late 1800s the drive force of the American economy. Again, because remember, the slaves originally were the driving force of the American economy. But without the slave system, now that money was being used in the black community. And guess what was happening? White families was having to go to black communities to get things. Do you see what I'm saying? You had rich black communities that outpaced their white neighbors. And this is where you have TVA. This is where you have all of these other government organizations at the turn of the 20th century to flood all these black towns. Why? Because America is a satanic society that is built to keep its Hebrews in check so that they can profit off of them while killing them at the same time, while killing us at the same time. This is the plan that they put in place, and this is the plan that they are continuing to stick to. Because look at that era after slavery. They attacked the black population, attacked, flooded their cities, created the KKK to run them into population centers, created terror in the turn of the 19th century with hundreds of thousands of people displaced, killed, executed, hung, burned, drawn and quartered, all of the castrated, all of the worst things that you could see. Don't you see? That's like what happened to the Indians, the Trail of Tears. This is the same thing. Do you see what I'm saying? It's the program that America has that you don't know is built into American ideology. The secret reason behind America. Because it happens every generation, right? In that generation, the 1800s to the 1900s, the Ku Klux Klan was formed. These cities were all flooded out. These black suburban cities that were rich were all flooded out. Their banks destroyed. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, they bombed these cities from the air. The first use of the Air Force is to bomb Americans, black towns, like they're the enemy, like they're the Germans. Because we are the enemy in a satanic society. We're the slave enemy that you have to make believe that we're members of the society by the propaganda and the spellcraft that they're using. Oh, these people believe that they're same as us when they're actually meant to be in this position in society. They can't believe that they're anything else, do all these things on their own. Bomb them. Do you see what I'm saying? That's when we were forced into the cities, right? This is where the ghetto comes from. Because the ghetto for Americans, for black Americans, in the turn of the century, did not exist. Do you understand there was no projects back then? There was no slums back, none of that. We had our own communities, we had our own business relationships, and we were successful at it. They destroyed all that. This is the Holocaust that you've never heard of. The Black American Hebrew Holocaust that happened from about 1890 to 1910. It's not in the history books because it was successful. Do you understand what I'm saying? The one that they did against the Indians is in the history books, and they've paid them reparations for it. The ones, plural, that they've done against us have only been one, and supposedly it was over in 1865. Do you see what I mean? This is the American Jewish Holocaust, right? This is Black America being killed in genocidal programs that some men sat down and deliberated on to see which ones would work the best. We know that has to be the case because they come generation after generation. After all of those destructive Ku Klux Klan raids destroyed the black upper middle class that was being formed, that had already formed by the first generation of being out of slavery, Then you had Jim Crow come in 1890, in the 1900s. They realized they weren't going to just have, they weren't going to just let us just go wild out there because we've become successful. They introduced Jim Crow in the 1890s, not in the 1860s, in the 1890s. After 30 years of freedom, and they discovered, oh my gosh, we're going to have to do something. You see what I mean? And so once they did this thing, once they developed the Ku Klux Klan, they sent all the black people into these population centers like Detroit and Chicago, where they could then place them in places in the city that were slums. You see what I'm saying? They were able to control us better in the city because we were all in one place, not scattered these self-sufficient townships all over the country to where we could come together and rise up against them. What did the Egyptians say about in Egypt? They are too numerous. They may join with our enemies and conquer us. Let us devise a scheme to make them lesser. Do you see what I'm saying? This is when the eugenics philosophies are coming out. This is when abortions and all of these concepts start coming into play, and they're all Planned Parenthood. Turn of the 20th century. They're looking around and saying, uh-oh, what Planned Parenthood is literally the same scheme that they came up with in Egypt. Let's destroy all the male babies, all the babies. Do you see what I'm saying? Planned Parenthood was what's that woman's name, y'all? Do y'all remember? It was just one person on here, but I know you remember the name of the woman who started Planned Parenthood and who slipped up and said Planned Parenthood is actually an attack against black people. You see, and I can't remember what her name was, but this is Hillary Clinton's like idol. Like Hillary Clinton said that this woman was her idol, that she fashioned her political career around this woman. And this woman was a stone cold eugenicist racist who implemented programs to kill black babies. Do you see what I'm saying? And now there are more abortions in the black community than any other community. There are more people that are dying from abortions than murders on the street right now. You see what I'm saying? This is the program that they put in place in the early 1900s. Once we got into these population centers, and then they could start controlling how we think and start putting poisonous products in our communities right there and then. But even in these places, you guys have to remember, even in these population centers where we were put into the slums of the city, those places began to become popular. When they would put us next to the river where it stank and, where nobody else wanted to be, these places became the places in the city where everybody flocked to. Why? Because in the turn of the 20th century New York, you have the invention of jazz, a music that took over the world and made the black community, even in the ghettos in New York where we were driven to, rich and famous. Anybody ever heard of the Harlem Renaissance? The Harlem Renaissance is only called the Harlem Renaissance because they want to minimize it. This Renaissance happened in every town in Black America. Do you see what I'm saying? It happened in every single city with different types of music popping up in different places. You had Mississippi blues, Delta blues come out of Mississippi in turn of the century 1900s, where these programs were being put in place, were making people into slaves again, and they're singing about it, and then become rich and famous on the Chitlin circuit, going up and down the coast of America and stopping at all of these were becoming black neighborhoods in these cities and are becoming rich because guess who's following after them into the Chitlin circuit, running after, trying to see what everybody's listening to? The majority white population. You guys don't recognize that in the 1920s, about 20 years after these programs had been in place, the creation of the Ku Klux Klan, the creation of Jim Crow laws, the herding of Black Americans into population centers like Chicago, New York, Detroit, and all of these different places around the country. In those places, jazz and blues began to be the most popular streams of entertainment in the world. Don't you know that jazz became world famous? In 1910, 1915, jazz became world famous. People were coming to New York, plucking people out of the ghettos and taking them to France to open up whole entertainment tours around these people. Do you see what I'm saying? And that there's specific names, and I can't give you specific names right now of the people that have gone and made these treks and brought jazz to France, brought jazz to England and to Ethiopia and all of these different places where jazz existed after the fact. I can't remember all the names, but you guys do just a cursory search of the Harlem Renaissance and see how many Black stars went abroad to continue their career. Do you see what I'm saying? And by 1920, America was completely infatuated with Black culture. Everything in America was Black culture. You guys ever heard of the Charleston? I feel crazy. I'm doing the Charleston. It's 100-year-old dance, right? That they were doing in the movies. You ain't never seen nobody Black do the Charleston, but it's from Charleston, South Carolina, in a place called the Bottom, because the other for the Charleston was the Black Bottom. The dance was called the Black Bottom because it took the world by storm. The people that were dancing and singing and coming up with this new style music, this swing and rock and roll and jazz and good time music became rich and famous everywhere. You had people making movies about the Charleston. You had whole dance teams copying going to Black communities, learning the dances, just so, because movies had just then come out, just so they could go and do the thing on camera, the dance on camera. And they call it the Roaring 20s with all of these dances and what do they call boppers? They were called boppers. All 100% Black culture. And white people were flocking to it and making the Black community in the city rich. That's where you got the zoot suits and all of the different styles of swing come out of this era, right? Because people loved it. And you guys not gonna believe this, but they had to put a stop to it. They did. Just like these other programs that you see happening, the Jim Crow, the Ku Klux Klan, the herding of people in the population centers, they had to stop it, right? So they did something that they knew was going to destroy everybody, but they had to do that because the economy was so tightly infused into the Black population that they knew if they did this thing, it would destroy the Black population that they were afraid of. Do you understand what I mean? And the thing that they did was crash the stock market. They crashed. What's up, son? Yeah, you know I'm outside doing a video. I'll be in there in a minute. Y'all ready to eat? Are y'all finished? All right. They crashed the stock market in 1928, y'all. Brought the Roaring 20s to a halt. You know, all that Black Bottom, all that Charleston stopped because people couldn't afford to eat. People had to do something different. You see what I'm saying? And then what happened? Then what happened in 1928? Same year in 1928, in fact. The first project, or the first sets of projects, started to be created. This is the next stage of their plan to control, manipulate, and eventually exterminate the Black Hebrew population of America. They started building public housing projects. In 1928, after the crash of the economy, the economy had become so infused with the Black dollar that they destroyed it to rebuild it again. And sent all those people that were in the slums, that were rebuilding the slums in these places like Chicago and New York, sent them deep into a depression. Sent white folks into a depression too. But they did something, and you have to recognize that this is the reason for the season, because you know now that America is a satanic society. If Benjamin Franklin was a murdering Satanist, and he's one of the founding fathers of the country, and they're all founding fathers of the country in the same group that's not called Satanism, but is palling around with Satanists, then you gotta know that it's a satanic mission involved with creating America. And that satanic mission has to be against Hebrew people, because look at what happened during that time, and every part of American society, every major event that happens in America has to be dedicated to that purpose. The stock market crash, they said people got out of the stock market before it happened. Certain people like Rothschild and all of these different high-up families got out of the stock market before it crashed. They knew that some people knew it was going to crash. It's because they crashed it. They had to. If they didn't, again, black popularity would have taken over the world. Or not the world, the country. And not out of malicious or, gain, greedy gain, because of the popularity of the culture. Because no matter what we do, hallelujah, it's not a brag or a boast, but no matter what we do, we still have that bit of varnished shine from the Father on us. No matter what we do. The scripture says in the book of Romans that the gifts come without repentance. And I mean, I've skipped over that verse 100 times. The gift of Elohim comes without repentance. That means that even if we don't repent, that gift is still promised to the Hebrew people. Do you understand what I'm saying? The Hebrew people are promised a gift that no matter what anybody can say, will never be taken away. The gift of Elohim comes without repentance. That means that that Jacob will be a people before his face forever, like it says in Malachi 3:6. So, because of that, as a nation of people that is dedicated, and not everybody in the nation, clearly just the upper class, the leaders of the nation that is against the Hebrew people have to proactively plan for the radiance to be seen and understood as such. Do you understand what I'm saying? You have to be proactive in controlling the Hebrews, because if you don't, they could get away from you. And that almost happened in the 20s. That's why they crashed on me. And look what they did, y'all. Same year, 1928, guess what project they start? Queensbridge, where Nas and them from. You guys know? You guys know the history. You guys have been familiar with the culture. 1928, the same year. Biggest project, 96 buildings. That's famous project. Biggest project on earth. They started that in 1928. At the same time that they crashed the economy. Why? Because, when what we need, because here's the plan, you guys. What they said was, we'll design concentration camps for them. And so then, not only will they be in the, and we'll be able to control them and introduce things into their environment in an experimental fashion. Like they did with the Jews in Germany and in Poland and in Austria later, right? They were introducing these programs into Germany and America at the same time. Do you see what I'm saying? The false Jews using it, when we talked about this, using their struggle as a means to propel themselves into Jerusalem, but at the same time, mimicking that in America in a real sense, to propel this group of actual Jews deeper into poverty and deeper into captivity. That's exactly what happened, y'all. Here was the plan. They built the projects, and they built them all over the country for the next 20 years, between 28 and 58, and then beyond that too. But they built them all over the country. In every single city in the country, there were large projects. This was a revitalization, reconfiguring of every urban landscape in the entire nation. That means it was a concerted effort and plan that was set up by someone for some reason, right? They tell you it was because of the war effort, but wait a second. I know a lot of the projects were built in the 40s, but the first of them were starting in the late 20s. Queensbridge was starting 28. Biggest one on earth in 28. You see, so it couldn't have been the war effort. It had to be some other reason. And this is what they did. That's brilliant. But this is what they did. They put white people in them first. Because they know black folks seeing, because here's the thing, they crashed the economy and it hurt all these white people. So now you've got, at the same food line, both black folks and white folks, both begging for food. This is where the term cracker comes from. And I hate to use, racial slurs, but this is where the term cracker comes from, because in this era, you had lots and lots of poor white people, and they would line up to eat government food just like the black people would do, except they would eat crackers. And so whenever black folks looked up and saw the poor white people across the street struggling like they were, and they're eating crackers, they would just call them crackers, right? And so this is where that terminology comes from, because there was a poor white society after the crash, right? Because when they crashed the economy, they couldn't help but getting some of them too. That's why you see people, the rich folks, pull out, and then all the moderately wealthy people and the working class guys, all these guys are jumping out of windows because their stocks were zero, because their now financial wealth was wiped out. And so you have just a bunch of poor people starting in the 30s and 40s. Well, what they did was they start building these projects, and they start putting the white people in the projects in the 40s and 50s. Projects were made for white folks, they say. And this also is the excuse, right? So they put white people in there first and say to them, you can use the projects as a stepping stone for yourself to be in public housing, little to nothing for rent. Then when you get a good job, when you save your money, after 2 or 3 years of being in the projects, you can go and purchase a house in the suburbs, because you've managed to pull yourself out of this poverty that's coming from the 28 crash. And now you have, coming into the next generation, this sustained saving wealth that you can use as collateral to get a loan for a house in the suburbs. If you've seen American Jew 1, the guy that discusses the creation of the suburbs, America was not a suburban community. America was a farm country and a city country. There was no in-between areas, right? What people started to do, and these were all Jewish contractors, what they started to do was build suburbs. Government-sponsored suburbs were now being put together. There's a town outside of New York called Levittown. You guys, this is all in American Jew 1. There's a town outside of New York called Levittown. And Levittown was 17,000 homes that were built with 0 buyers. This is the first time anything like that has ever happened. Who builds 17,000 homes with nobody in them? These were government loans that were government programs that were used to build houses with no buyers. This means they anticipated the buyers. Do you see what I'm saying? These government programs that built these suburbs like Levittown were implicit in the instructions to receive the contract that black people could not live in these towns for at least 2 generations. This was in the contract that you had to sign to get the loan or the grant from the government. They build these houses, 17,000 of them empty in places outside, 20, 30 miles outside of the city where nobody wanted to live, where there was no industry, where there was nothing. So people would not buy them. Nobody wanted to buy them except for these white families that were coming out of the projects. These white families coming out of the projects were given preferential treatment to know that even these things existed. And then they were given grants and loans, some of them, to go buy these houses. Do you see what I'm saying? So that first generation of white folks to come out of the projects gained generational wealth in 1 generation. They gained most of what they lost in the Great Depression back in the projects. In the meantime, the projects was unavailable to black people until a certain time when they opened up the projects, and now black folks are in the projects alongside white people. This is when you have white people starting to move out of the projects, black people moving in. Do you see what I'm saying? And now what happens? Once black people are looking at that project and saying, hey, and this is all psychology. These are all the mind games that they had been developing in Germany and all these others that they're now inflicting on the population. Now that you could see white people becoming rich from the projects, saving their money, moving out to these places outside of the city and becoming, not wealthy, but comfortable. Black people started to say these projects look like a good thing. You watch interviews from the 50s and the 60s about the projects, and don't you see black people smiling and laughing? Yeah, I can't wait to get me a project, because they were popular, they were clean, they were affordable, and they were in the city where all the industry was. Do you see what I'm saying? Black people had much of an opportunity to benefit off the project system, except none of the housing in the suburbs was able to be sold to them by government contract.